Welcome to another episode of Washington in Focus. I'm your host, Tim Klauser, with the Center Square's Washington State investigative reporter, TJ Martineau. I'm here to talk about the Washington State Attorney General's office billing more than 34,000 hours worth of time towards lawsuits that the state has filed against the Trump administration. TJ, why don't you tell us a little bit about this and what that time adds up to?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that stand out. One, these 34,000 hours represent almost 4 years worth of billable work, and the two-thirds of these hours were billed within a 6-month period. So what we saw was a ramping up of billable hours. And something else to keep in mind is that these are billable hours only with the Attorney General's office staff. This is not for outside counsel or outside law firms. So the total number of hours, billed hours spent on litigation against Donald Trump during his second term could be much, much, much higher. We just don't know because, uh, w- we're going to try and find that out, but we just don't know how many more hours the outside law firms are. We do know that the Attorney General's office, as of last August, has a massive number of contracts with outside law firms, more than 1,000. And so the question is how many of those contracts have to do with Donald Trump?
You say 4 years. That's quite a bit of time. I mean, the Trump administration has been in office, for the second term since January 2025. We're almost a year and a half into this, and they've built 4 years worth of work. That's like me sitting down at this desk and working for 4 years nonstop. How many attorneys are we talking about? Is this, 1 attorney? Is this hundreds of attorneys?
Yeah, I mean, so there was one estimate by uh, someone from Jackson Boehner from the Citizen Action Defense Fund. He estimated that there had to have been 100 lawyers or the equivalent. The Attorney General's office said that there's only 30 attorneys, but then the question is, well, how many of those billable hours were staff, like non legal staff, paralegals, people who are actually not attorneys? And that's, I think, what's adding to the complication of they don't know how much this costs taxpayers to do these litigation because they can't just use or assume a flat rate. They have to use they would have to use different rates depending on which attorney, how many years of experience they have, whether it's a paralegal. They all are getting different, they're getting paid differently depending on the hours. So that's the issue that's going on. So when they say that there's 30 attorneys, I don't think it's just 30 attorneys working on this. I'm sure that there's also other staff that are helping out. But I think that what that could indicate, we don't know. I'm just saying it could indicate that that there's a lot of support staff for a handful of attorneys that are dealing with this.
Mhm. Just some quick math for those listening. I mean, 34,000 hours, assuming there is roughly 30 attorneys working on that, that comes out to about 1,133 hours per attorney. Now, if we break that down to days, that's over 47 days straight of working on these cases. I mean, that's a considerable amount of time, regardless of whether it's the Trump administration or any other lawsuits. What is this costing the taxpayer?
I mean, that's the problem. We don't know how much it's costing taxpayers. It's definitely gonna have to be in the millions of dollars. If we've used any kind of conservative estimate, but we just don't know. I think what's going to be interesting is to see how much of this work has been the attorney side is with outside counsel or outside law firms who are involved in these lawsuits. So that's where it could get very interesting to see who they've tasked with overseeing these lawsuits. And something to keep in mind also is that these lawsuits, a vast majority of them concern federal funding or federal policies around federal
Mhm.
funding of some type or another, grants or something like that. So the, I'm sure for people who are, would defend this would say that the money spent doesn't compare to the amount of money that they've been able to preserve in federal funding on for right now. A lot of these cases haven't been settled, but they have gotten temporary um, they've managed to temporarily stop Trump from cutting spending in certain areas. So that would be the argument I imagine people would say on that side of it.
Mhm, and, how many lawsuits are we talking? I know, Ferguson, when he was on the campaign trail running for governor, he brought up the number 50 to 60 lawsuits that he had filed, and during the Trump administration's first term, we're over a year into his second term, and I believe, Ferguson's successor, Attorney General Nick Brown. Has he not filed just as many, if not more, in this shorter amount of time?
Yeah, that's what's I think what is really, why I think this story is noteworthy. The hours are noteworthy and worth reporting on is it represents a massive increase and ramping up of litigation against Trump during his second term. I don't believe Ferguson filed his first lawsuit until I think 8 months or 9 months into Donald Trump's first year during his first term. And so whereas Nick Brown in his office and Ferguson, when he got elected governor, was very open about how they'd been working on preparation to litigate against Trump before he was even elected. So
Mhm.
this represents a, I'd say, pre-planned coordination on just they assumed he would do certain things. They had the legal work and the legal preparation done, and then they would file the lawsuit against him or whatever it was that they're trying to obtain. And so I think that the question is why w- what made it different the second time around? Were they just more prepared? Were they not expect because I a lot of people didn't think that Donald Trump was going to get elected in 2016. So there wasn't as much prep work. A lot of people thought even, who didn't vote for
Mhm.
Hillary Clinton thought it was in the can for her. So maybe that caught people off guard during the first term initially, but whereas with the second term, before he's even elected, there's this presumption that if he is, here's stuff he's going to do, and this is legal work that they're going to work on. Because a lot of these hours, when I was looking at what it was spent on, a lot of it was on pre-litigation investigative work. So there was, research or whatever it was. So there was a lot of preparation work before any of a lot of these lawsuits were filed.
And we know that when Ferguson was still Attorney General just a few years ago, he oversaw a pretty substantial expansion of the Attorney General's office. I believe they
Right.
hired hundreds of additional attorneys. I mean, what would the situation look like without that expansion? Do we have any numbers on that? Is it safe to say that that expansion is allowing them to put this much work into the lawsuits against the
Um,
Trump administration?
I think it would really depend on what type of attorneys or staff that they hired, because some of them may have been focused only on certain, because there's different divisions of the attorney general's office. So they may have it depends on who he hired, because they may not have anything to do with this litigation, or it wouldn't even apply to them. If you're hiring somebody for the fraud division, probably not going to apply to a whole lot of these situations. This doesn't have to do with fraud. This has to do with whether or not the president or the executive branch uh, has discretion over federal funding coming through federal agencies. So, but yeah, I mean, if it hadn't expanded as much, you do have to wonder if some staff that would be focused on this litigation would be focused on other things because they just don't have the numbers, or if they would be filing a lot of these litigation at all. Maybe they would just focus on ones where they knew that they were guaranteed to win or very likely to win because so far, overall, there's been hundreds of lawsuits filed against his administration by different state attorney general's offices. And so far, the administration has won, I believe, 30, and then 19 the plaintiffs have won. So so far, the one cases that have been closed have been in the administration's favor.
Mhm. And we know filing lawsuits, going through this lengthy legal battles, is quite expensive. If we were to file a lawsuit, those costs would fall on us individually or the company if we're filing as a company. But in the case of the state, I mean, those costs fall on the taxpayers. And I understand you brought up the argument that, we're talking about billions of dollars in federal funding that the state is suing over. So there's the argument that, what we might get in return for these lawsuits is much more than what we might be spending now. But at the same time, in both cases, it's our tax dollars being spent. Now, what are the tax dollars that they're trying to preserve for these programs? Is it for stuff like SNAP? Is it housing? Is
Yeah,
it some of this more DEI funding?
it's for a variety of different things. A lot of this stuff I didn't even know existed, like the federal emergency FEMA's Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program. A lot of acronyms going on. One had to do with a program called Personal Responsibility Education, which has to do with teen reproductive and sexual health education. And some of them just have to do with policies related to qualifying for this funding from at the state level. So it just has a lot to do with money. that has been. I think that this is where a critic might find it ironic that there's some of the lawsuits has had to do with federal or sorry, state autonomy, states' rights, and yet a lot of these lawsuits has to do with ensuring that states have continual access to federal funding that they've had prior. So it's interesting that there's some lawsuits that are intended to protect what is seen as state autonomy and overreach, against overreach by the federal government. On the other hand, they're telling the federal government what they can and can't do with their own money, or saying like, you gotta keep giving us the money, can't put any restrictions on certain things. So, it's definitely been interesting to see how this is really turned into a form of legal lawfare, where a lot of
Mhm.
states are fighting the federal government, in the courtroom, and this is probably I mean, it would be interesting to see how many lawsuits have been filed against presidents prior to, say, President Trump, How many lawsuits were
Mhm.
filed against the Obama administration? How many lawsuits were filed against the Bush administration, Clinton administration? And how does that compare? And what does that say about where how a lot of things are being settled legally in the United States? Because, if it wasn't settled through a lawsuit back in the day, how was it settled?
Mhm. Well, yeah, the political landscape has changed substantially over the last few decades, especially since Trump joined the White House in 2016, 2017, through Biden and now to today. Much different, wildly different political agendas from DC to Olympia and Washington State right now. But TJ, we appreciate you covering this. And for anyone hoping to read that story, you can get it at thecentersquare.com. But otherwise, thank you for joining us for another episode of Washington in Focus.